Our next speaker is also an insider and a member of the aviary. As Assistant Naval Attaché and Air Attaché to New Delhi and Kathmandu from 1965 to 1967, he was involved in intelligence collection and provided intelligence support for defense attachés throughout Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. 1965 to 1967, you may recall, rather interesting years. This tour was followed by assignment in the Naval Scientific and Technical Intelligence Center, where as head of Missile Ordnance and Astronautics Division, he directed the production of technical intelligence reports for the Navy and Defense Intelligence Agency, that's the DIA, at all classification levels. During this period, he was chairman of the Naval Missile Group, an interagency group that supported the Guided Missile and Astronautic Intelligence Committee.
Also, as chief of the Navy's Intelligence Anti-Ship Missile Task Force, he directed the effort providing intelligence support for a critical anti-ship missile defense research and development effort. During this time, he was a briefer to the President's Scientific Advisory Committee and testified before the House and Senate committees on technical naval intelligence. Other intelligence assignments included 3 years as Chief of the Targets Development Branch at Headquarters, U.S. European Command, and an intelligence-related assignment in the National Military Command System Support Center. He retired as a commander in the U.S. Navy.
In his post-Navy career, he taught at university and worked in the private sector, research and development community, involved in U.S. government-sponsored projects for Defense Nuclear Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command. But his area of interests have expanded since he left these services, and he was part of the aviary. Networking with the parapsychology community, he worked throughout the executive branch to address issues of government, support for basic parapsychology research, and consider the implications of these phenomena.
From 1985 until 1991, he was special assistant to Senator Claiborne Pell. In 1985, he founded and was president of the Center for Applied Anomalous Phenomena. This nonprofit educational and scientific research organization was chartered to conduct research and analysis of anomalous phenomena, their implications and applications. The center was transferred continuing on now, into the Human Potential Foundation, which he and Senator Claiborne Pell founded in 1989. The foundation was involved in a number of research projects, including a joint research effort with the Chinese Academy of Somatic Science in Beijing and an accelerated bone healing, with a sponsored symposium conducted by Russian medical scientists on psychoanalytical and psychocorrection computer technologies, as well as a survey of attitudes of medical professionals toward death and the dying process.
Under the Center for Interspecies Communications, the Foundation conducted projects Neptune Helper 1 and 2, involving research with the Atlantic bottlenose and spotted dolphins. Of particular note is the Foundation's involvement with a major 2-year program funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Initiative, including an international conference, When Cosmic Cultures Meet, in Washington, D.C., held in May of 1995. That was just 8 months before I entered the field. At the conference, a wide spectrum of academic disciplines and interests assessed the implications, preparations, and responses for the time when there was no ambiguity about the understanding that higher intelligence from cosmic cultures are meeting.
In November of 1998, the Human Potential Foundation was dissolved, and its principal remaining undertaking, a global peace initiative, transferred to the newly established Peace and Emergency Action Coalition for Earth, Inc. The principal function of peace is to oversee the creation of a global center for sustainable peace and development system. Our speaker has degrees from George Washington University, University of Maryland, and a PhD from American University in International Studies. Please welcome Dr. Scott Jones to X-Conference 2008.
Thank you for coming.
Sir. Well, thank you for your patience. All right. I know that you are terribly interested in the aviary, and so I decided to give you a briefing on how to become a member of the aviary. And this will be in 2 parts. The first section will be the long way or the hard way, which I'm sure that you will not be interested in taking. And the tail end of this particular will be the a shorter way or the easy way. The hard way starts with becoming a carrier jet fighter pilot, and some of the attributes of that include, and there is a young guy, that was before the snow fell on my head. Take a look at those eyes. Those are real eagle eyes, and actually they were 2015 at the time as far as visual acuity was concerned. The left eye changes, and I will tell you that story a little later on. This was in Ready Room 1 aboard the USS Princeton during the Korean War. Made 2 cruises during that battle. Here I am flying on a photo escort mission. One of the joys of that was that you pull alongside the other F-9F, who's a photoplane, and smile, and he'll take your photo. And my mother thought they were great. I would send her copies. And then, of course, if you're really into this, you're climbing to engage the MiG-15s, which fortunately for us, we didn't do too often because they had a 100-knot speed advantage and were much more maneuverable at high altitudes. The F-9F2 was a straight wing, and the MiG-15, of course, was swept wing. And if we could work them down the low altitude, which we tried to do, and finally get into a position to get a shot, they would just add the rest of their throttle and leave us. But we tried. Now, I say this is learn how to make lemonade. If you can read that, go ahead. My commanding officer was Johnny Magda. What had happened, we're coming back from a mission and flamed out, and actually we were on instruments, and what makes it a little dicey, but you try to do is keep your wings level and push your nose down and keep your turbine going to a certain RPM so that if you can get your battery to work, you can get a relight. Otherwise, start thinking of Plan B, which is to leave your aircraft. And by the time, this was in the winter of 1950, and as soon as they flamed out, I lost everything. The battery it was just too cold up there. And so going down, at that time we were told, although we were wearing exposure suits, which was the Mark I, which was simply a rubberized suit, and one of the joys of that at the end of a mission, even an hour, 15, 20-minute mission, you'd collected enough sweat in the bottom of it that you slosh when you got out of the cockpit. But they estimated 3 to 4 minutes max of mobility, even with your exposure suit, before you could not help yourself get into a sling of the helicopter. And I did not want to bail out or to ditch. I really wanted to relight, and it worked out. Now, the joy of this was from the Reader's Digest. The lemonade I made out of that is they bought this and they gave me a check for $25, which the rest of the squadron mates was wonderful, and so I got to buy the first round of drinks when we got back the next time we got into port. Now, things do happen on a flight deck. I was in 104. You'll see 2 people at the nose of the aircraft. I'm the one in the lead. The guy behind me is a very brave young crewman who, instead of running away from this sucker that we felt reasonably about to explode, he came out to help me. And we both ran around the island structure, and indeed there was no fire. This is a larger scene of what happened. That was a tailhook bounce. The stubbing action didn't keep the tailhook down, and one of my squadron mates just came in and cut my plane in half. He ended up on the bow facing the catapult, of which another squadron member was on at full throttle and already given a salute to launch when this happened. And that would have been a fireball if they had done that. But things worked out fine. There was slight injury. There was a lot of stuff flying around on the deck after that hit. Okay, are you sure you want to become a member of the aviary? Now, it will be helped to have interesting experiences and to remember them, because it's been my experience in life that each of them has more than one message. This is actually, I kept souvenirs. This was a photograph that I carried on this particular mission in Chongqing. The red circles in this particular were anti-aircraft sites that were our targets. I don't remember which one, but was in the Baker sector there. This was a 3-carrier strike over close to 200 airplanes. The job of the jets takes you back to times of knighthood, where you would throw down your visor and you would tilt your weapon of choice and you would gallop at somebody else. Well, this was really gun barrel to gun barrel stuff. Our job was to go in ahead of the props, who were much slower and, of course, carrying the heavy ordnance, and we would try to engage the ground positions, draw their fire, and then try to knock them out, and increase the probability that the props would survive their attack. This was a particularly tough target, and we did not have all of the weapon sites identified, and so we were getting a heck of a lot more fire than we did before. Now, I think I was 22 maybe at this time, 23 max, and was getting used to these things, but this one was a little bit different, and it was somewhat terrifying. The stream of 23 millimeter and 37 coming up, radar laid, was just constant. And I didn't have anything to do with what happened next, that is consciously, but I went out of body, and I ended up somewhere on my left shoulder watching what was going on, but at a extraordinarily slow time. Time just almost stopped. And when you're in a battle situation, there's a lot of stuff on the radios. All of that noise went from normal talk like this and excited talk to like if you slow down the tape and like that. And I could see the little black things coming up, and then they would, the different colors as there would be an explosion, and these little splinters would go out. That was the shrapnel. And then my nose would go right through where that had been, and then I would see the next one coming up. And I went through 3 of these, and I was fascinated. I had never had anything like this in my life. It was beautiful. It really was. And then we went back to real time, and I got on the gun sight and picked my target and delivered my ordnance and got off. Well, when I was flying back to the carrier, I thought, I don't know what happened, but I sure as heck can't tell anybody about that ever. If the flight surgeon hears about that, he'll ground my butt. He'll never let me fly again, because you can't go crazy in an airplane. Those things at that time cost $5 or $6 million. Think what they cost now. So the message from that experience that I thought about more was that I wonder what time really is, and I wonder what consciousness is, because things seem to be going differently than my normal. This is a page out of my logbook, May 13th, Sunday, Mother's Day, and this was a low-altitude reconnaissance flight. We had color codes for the different, this was all in North Korea, and I had flown this one many times. During the daytime, the North Koreans didn't move anything because we had such air superiority. At nighttime, they moved their stuff a lot. So if you saw anything, you were very excited. Usually we didn't see anything. If we saw something we thought was camouflage, we would make a run on it, try to see if it would burn. If it would burn with a haystack with black smoke, we knew we had a truck in there. And then you would mark your chart, and so that could be, when you got back and debriefed, they could go after that. Well, at the end of this particular route, there was a escarpment in the road, serpentine up, and then there was a long plateau. And usually we turn inside of that and then go back out the track. Well, I decided to go up and take a look at the plateau. And just as I got up there, I saw an ox cart on the road ahead, and and guys in uniforms, winter uniforms, white uniforms, with their weapons over their shoulders. I mean, it's a legitimate military target. Quite an exciting event to see in the daytime. So I flipped on my master arming switch, got a little altitude, and turned over, and it was, no problem. 20 millimeter cannons in your nose. Every third round was a high explosive. Every third round, a round that you can see where it's going, and pickled off a couple hundred rounds at the ox cart. By this time, the Chinese, I'm sure they were, had heard me and were bugging out, getting in on either side of the road into the ditch. And I was following my rounds in, and now I was close enough to see really what it was. It was an ox cart with an ox. And there was a body on the cart, and there were some civilians, probably family members, on either side of the cart. And about that time, the rounds hit. And the cart, the ox, and the family were just gone. I didn't feel too good about that. That was not why I had been hired to do. Now, please remember this, because this comes back again. I came back and I remember that debriefing very well. Okay, this is an SA-2 site, happens to be from Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When I arrived in India, I was prepared for the job, but there was another war going on. This was in Vietnam, and the people that I had flown with during the Korean War were now flying off carriers in Vietnam. And they were running into even more heavier anti-aircraft fire, but something new had been added. And this was the SA-2 guideline missile. And this is the classic. We had seen these all over Eastern Europe and Bayou-2 coverage in Europe, in the Soviet Union. This was the export model that the Soviets were willing to sell to anyone that they favored and were willing to buy it. Actually, they were giving them away to the North Vietnamese, and they were causing us a lot of problems. So there was a worldwide collection effort. We've got to find out everything we can about this missile system so we can develop countermeasures to decrease our losses. We got that message in India, as everyone else did. The only thing that we got another message in India saying that India was in the process of buying these from the Soviet Union for their defense against a potential attack from Pakistan. And so the system we assume would soon be in, and they would be building the site somewhere around. And so this was a target. We had no animus towards the Indians, but this was a great opportunity to help people who really needed help in Vietnam. Once a week, the intelligence community and the embassy would meet, and we would talk over problems and successes, and everybody, the CIA, Army, Air Force, and the Navy had the same requirement. And so the chief of the station, as far as the CIA, was the leader of this little group, and he said, okay, who wants to manage this? And I volunteered, which was relatively rare in that group. Usually people would say, oh, no, I'm too busy, I can't take that on too. And so the Navy took that on as a project. And what happened in the next month and a half was that something happened to me that I did not recognize, and it took a number of years to find out what was going on. But I started functioning psychically, and I found every missile site in a month and a half in India. And some of them were quite easy. They obviously would defend the capital, so the first 6 was a no-brainer. But the other dozen, they spread around. And it became a joke in the embassy. Anytime we had our own aircraft, the Naval Attaché had an aircraft and a collection capability. And every time they would see me in my flight gear, someone who knew about this would nudge me and say, "You're going to find another missile site." And I said, "Perhaps, And it was very simple. As I would be flying along on taking the ambassador to a speech engagement or something, I would get a feeling in my stomach. And the first time it happened, it was almost like nauseous, and I wondered, gosh, what did I have for breakfast? And as the gorge started to rise, then a question came to mind. I wonder what's off to the right, or I wonder what's off to the left. And that was a clue, and I would follow that thought, and this is the way I found them. Now, explain this to the rest of the community. And when you have to write up your intelligence report, they're very detailed, and you have to explain, well, talking about this feeling in my stomach and the rising gorge, people weren't buying that. They were convinced that I had recruited a source that was telling me where these sites were going. I had, but the source apparently was up here or in here or somewhere. I don't know where the source was. That was the only poor fitness report I ever got in the Navy. My boss was absolutely furious at me that I would not tell him where that was coming from. This was probably a very crude form of remote viewing. I don't know what else to call it. But it alerted me that this is an interesting experience and I need to find out something about it. And I would say in order to get into the aviary, you have to be open to the unusual and having smart and inquisitive and sometimes weird, and I won't identify who I thought was weird among my friends, but perhaps some are here today, will help. But here is certainly a friend, Brendan O'Regan. At that time, Brendan was the vice president of research for the Institute of Noetic Science. Brendan would use me as a gopher. He would call me and he would say, Scott, we've heard about this guy in Dallas who makes these claims one thing and another. We're pretty busy. Can you check him out? And of course, I had interest in these things, and so I would check them out. And I will show you some of these other guys that I checked out. Brendan, of course, died much too young. Here's one of the guys that Brendan called me. He said, this guy, he's a dentist in Carmel, California, and he's come up with a theory that he uses hypnosis for some patients who ask for that rather than drugs for some of his dental procedures. And what he has observed and what he's telling people is that goofy things happen, that sometimes these people who are under a fairly heavy hypnotic state start talking to me, but it's not them. And I ask, well, who are you? And they give me other names other than the patient's names. And he said, I don't know what this is, but right now I'm calling it spirit possession. So Bill pioneered that, and I went out there to check him out for noetics. And we talked, and he said, well, the only way that you'll leave this not wondering what it is unless you experience it. And he said, have you ever been hypnotized? I said, yeah, I have. And so we went through it. He took me down, went deep, and he asked the simple question, is anyone in there? And I waited, and I waited, and then I just about lost it. I started speaking, but it wasn't me speaking. And I was vocalizing, and Bill started this conversation. And he did this 3 times. He got 3 different people speaking. The last one was this. And Bill said, and who are you? And this voice, which was a higher pitch, gave an Oriental name I didn't recognize. And he said, well, where are you from? And there was a good deal of confusion at this point. And this voice said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, what do you last remember? And he said, I was with my family, and we were, my grandfather had died, and we were on the process of burying him. And then I don't remember anything like that. I think it is reasonable to conclude that this was one of the people that I had killed in that attack, and that in my empathy, my openness, like, oh, crap, that isn't what I wanted to do, he came aboard. And I carried him along. I think it was absolutely benign, didn't cause me any trouble. Remember your experiences. Bill has written that. Bill's in spirit now, but his wife is still carrying on that business. I think it's very important and most interesting and very challenging. Michael Drosden, perhaps you've heard of him. He wrote several books, 2 of them on the Bible code. Michael came down when I worked for Claiborne Pell, and we met. I've known him for that long. And perhaps you know him for the work that he did in the Bible Code. In Bible Code 2, he has written that the key to the Bible Code is buried in Jordan on the Lisan Peninsula. And what the key is, according to what he reads from using the Bible code, it is a piece of technology that was placed there by extraterrestrials. Well, when I read that, he got my attention, and so I thought, well, we need to find that. And found out when I talked to Michael that he's been trying to get permission to do that dig for years, and the government will not give him permission. Well, I had recruited the University of Jordan for my peace program, and I was making trips over there. And so the next time I went over there, I did a little dowsing from satellite photography, and Michael was rather vague about where he thought it was on the Lisan Peninsula. And so I felt I knew where it was, hired a guy to drive me down there, and he talked his way into this area because it was nothing secure about it except it was a mining company had a 100-year lease on it to do surface mining. This is at the south end of the Dead Sea, and all full of minerals, one thing and another. But he talked his way in. We went in, and I took my dowsing rods with me. We had to walk about a mile to where I wanted to go, and there's where the key to the Bible code is located. And I took my GSP with me, but I couldn't get any signals there. It was too close to Iraq. And I think that the U.S. government had suppressed those frequencies. And so I can find it again easily enough. And I told Michael where it was, but he still can't get permission to go there. Any of you have your Indiana Jones hat? You want to try to make that? Okay. Well, but Michael Drosden, to me, is more important than what he did in the mind control area. Before he wrote the Bible code, he was doing research on what he called mind control or mind influence. And people had come to him as an investigative reporter, indicating that somebody was playing with their mind and that they were upset about it. They were manifesting some physical problems. They felt it was directly related to what was going on with them. And so he was really trying to find out what was going on. And he had captured some signals. He spent some money. And he wanted to get several people. He wanted to get the FBI involved, and he wanted to get the Defense Department. He wanted NSA to do a signal analysis of what he had. And so he came to Senator Pell and asked him to help. And Pell turned Drosden over to me. This was the first time I met Drosden. I'll cut this rather short because I do want to get to the other half of my talk. Drosden had heard, he knew that the FBI had hired 2 scientists who had a public reputation for being interested and somewhat competent in this area of signals of mind relationship with certain frequencies. And so he felt, and I think quite reasonably, that the FBI had an interest in this also. And so he tried to get the FBI to agree to meet with him, and they wouldn't do it. And so I drafted a letter to Director Sessions, and he sent it. Pell sent it to him, and the director said, okay, we'll meet him, but you have to send one of your people with him. And so we went together. It was a very early morning meeting, 7:30 in the morning, and that's not when people usually go to work in Washington, D.C. We went down to the new FBI building, which I think was designed by the KGB. Looks like something they would build. It looks like the first director of the FBI, a big bulldog sort of thing. And we were met and signed in. And instead of going to the upper floors, to the office of the deputy director, who we had our appointment with, we went down deep. And they took us into what I am sure is a room where they do interrogation. And there was this beautiful big mirror on one side of the room, and the deputy director, Douglas Gow, G-O-W, came in with one of his spear holders and sat on one side of the table, and Michael and I sat on folding metal chairs on the other side. And Gow gave him a lecture saying, the only reason we're here is because that guy's boss got a hold of my boss. Otherwise, we would have nothing to do with you. And now what the hell do you want? It was a lovely beginning. And Michael, who I have been with before, and he can be very penetrating as a reporter, but he can also be very diplomatic. And so he started off in his diplomatic mode and said that, I have a list of people who are making these complaints about mind influence and mind control, and I know that you have an interest in it. We don't have any interest in it. Well, you hired these two people, and he named them, and I've got a list of people I suspect you have. People, when they get in trouble, what do? Well, you call the FBI and complain. And he said, so I want to trade your list for my list, and that will build your data. You'll have more people to work with, and I'll have other people. And it was about that tone of voice, and I can't remember what Gal said, but at that point, Michael was to my left. Michael started not making sense, and it just was sort of gibberish. And then he got louder and louder and profane. And I looked up at the two guys in front of me, Gal and his assistant, and, I don't mean to pick on these people, but they had an evil cast on their face. And I just sort of felt that it was time for us to leave. And so I got a hold of Michael, and I pulled him up towards me, and I said, Mr. Gal, I think that we're not going to get anywhere, and I thank you for your time, but we're going to leave. And they escorted us out. And it was still somewhat dark and cold when we got outside, and it took a long time for Michael, 10 or 15 minutes, before he really settled down. And I said, do you remember what happened there? He said, no. And I said, well, you really lost it. You blew it. And he said, I don't remember that at all. I think the FBI was well aware of the effects of certain frequencies on the mind and decided that they would give a demonstration to get this guy off their back. It did intimidate Michael, but he didn't leave the problem until he had another attack. He called me and he said, Scott, let's don't talk about this ever again. And that's when he was in Israel, because he had talked to the Israelis about this. And he said, I want to go over and tell them, really, I'm leaving this field. And but then he discovered Professor Rips, who was involved in the Bible Code, and that's when he wrote his book. Now, a couple people, friends of John's and mine, were in Moscow in 1991 when the KGB had a fire sale of their classified experiments they were trying to make some money. One really wonders if they sold anything that they thought was really valuable or not, or anything that it was the first generation and they were in the fifth, or that they had an easy solution to. But at any rate, the Morrises came back and told me about this, and I was interested in this, and so I invited Dr. Smirnoff and his colleague to come in because I wanted to find out. And as soon as I extended this invitation, I started getting calls from some of my friends in the intelligence community. And they said, we understand that Smirnoff is coming to Washington and we'd like to meet him. And I got enough of those calls, 3 or 4, that I said, well, the way to do this is just simply to set up a briefing for the intelligence community. And so we did that. I already had one set up for University of Kansas Medical School, because they were saying, they called this psychocorrection for the medical use of this, of mind influence. This was a very interesting meeting we had. I told them that the only people that would be there were from the U.S. intelligence community and NIH. And that didn't bother them. They asked what else was going on when we had breakfast together before we went to that meeting. And I told them that one of the headlines, there's a guy by the name of Koresh in Waco, Texas, in a standoff going on, and it's causing some real problems. He's got some women and children in there, and we're worried about them. And the FBI has the duty to talk him out of there before anything bad happens. Well, when we had this meeting, there probably were a little over 20 people there. I knew some, but not all of them. And we worked through a couple of translators. And I said, we're here for Dr. Smirnoff to present his psychocorrection. And there will be break times. He will take questions. If he will tell you whether he'll take questions now or later. We weren't 2 or 3 minutes in it before a hand shot up. I was in the front row, and then Smirnoff looked up and he said, yes. And this guy said, I'm from the FBI. We've got a problem in Waco. Did you bring anything that we can use there? And, that really ticked me off. And so I stood up to tell the guy, I said, look, at the break, why don't you get with him? I didn't get that far before Smirnoff said, no, we didn't bring that program with us. Would you like me to contact Moscow and ask for it? And I thought, well, that's gone too far. And so they did get together, and I think the FBI guy realized that they would be putting themselves out on a limb to ask these Russians to send something that may or may not work. And as it turned out, there's Smirnoff picture. He's dead now. His wife is running that institute. There's Operation Trojan Horse. That's sadly how that ended. And I think Koresh has to take credit for that. He was a nutcase, and he kept saying, in the exchange, they had some real good negotiators there, the best that the FBI had, but he was going to reveal the secret of the 7 seals, and when he was finished that, then he would let everyone else come out, and he kept putting it off and putting it off. David Oates, an Australian. I got a call from Brendan that said there's this young Australian that lives in Dallas, and he thinks he's discovered something interesting called reverse speech therapy. Why don't you check him out? And I said, sure, I'll do that. I had a brother that lived in Dallas, hadn't seen him for a while. And so I flew into Dallas, spent a day with David, all day long, very intense. He explains technically what he thought was going on. And now everyone knows what an Australian is like. I mean, they're really stereotypical, easy, aggressive, one thing another. And I thought, if there's anything to this, first thing he said, this is an infallible lie detector. The people will reveal subconsciously in reverse speech the truth. And so I thought, well, now, he said, and Jones, you've got to try this or you'll never know really how it works. And I thought, yeah, I should take my pants off in front of you. I know the first question you'll ask. So, but he taped me, and I led the conversation up to the technology, the potential physics of sound, one thing another. And after a few minutes of that, he said, knock off this bullshit. He said, there will be some reversals in there, but they'll be very hard to hear, to work out. He said, speak from your heart. I said, okay. And, just without any thinking, I said, let me fly a couple missions for you that I flew in the Korean War. And the first mission I talked about was the one I told you about, that reconnaissance mission where I wiped out that family. Now, it took maybe 15 seconds to 20 seconds to get that out. And he stopped the tape, and he said, now David told me later, he said, I am so experienced in this that I can get the reversals from people sometimes when they're talking. And he said, there's a good one in there. And so he rewound the tape, and he played it just what I said. And of course, you hear speech in reverse. And he said, did you hear that? And I said, yeah, I heard that. He played it again, and played it over and over. And I said, I'm not getting it. He said, what it is He said, I don't know what it means. He said, you're saying in reverse, I gave up an eye. And I said, does that mean anything to you? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, I can see that means something to you. You know, I had not told David or almost nobody about that particular mission. What had happened to me later in my Navy career, when I'd gone through some intelligence assignment, it was due to go back to the fleet. I was still the hottest fighter pilot the Navy ever had, and that's how I was going to make admiral. Just before that assignment was due, my left eye went from 20/20 to 20/60. And, you know, and there was no explanation for that. And I was due for my annual physical, and, you know, I couldn't qualify as a carrier pilot with 20/60 vision. My assessment of that is that while I was good at what I did, and I was very good, I really could deliver ordnance well, and I enjoyed the thrill of flying. That was not where my heart was. My heart was somewhere else, and I didn't have the brains or the guts to admit that to myself. But some part of me said, "Don't worry about it, Jones. We'll take care of it. You're not going to fly off carriers again." Now, I continued to fly, but in other missions, anti-submarine warfare. David Oates, controversial, but he's on to something. There's his book. Now, David Oates, I don't know if you can read that. What happened, this is a copy of the letter that I wrote to Dick Cheney when Dick was Secretary of Defense. This was during the period of Desert Shield. This was the 5 months logistics buildup for the first Gulf War, August of 90 to January of 91. And during this time, Daddy Bush, President Bush, and Secretary of State Baker and Dick Cheney, when they were talking about Desert Shield, David would tape these and do the analysis. And he called me up. I was working for Pell, and he said that each of these guys, every time they're talking about Desert Shield, there is an interesting reversal. It sounds like Simone. And he said, what do you think that means? And I said, well, David, I don't know. And he said, well, could it be a secret mission or something like that? And I said, no, I don't know, David. Well, I said, what are you going to do about it? He said, well, I'm going to put it in my, he published a bi-monthly or monthly journal, and so it was going to go into public domain. And I thought, well, you know, after I hung up, I said, if this really means something, I think I'll let Dick know. Now, I knew Dick very well. I helped him when I was, for his first run for the Congress. I was an instructor in political science at Casper College in Wyoming, and he won that. I helped him. He had his first heart attack, and I helped him get by that, keep his funding going in. He recovered from that all right. So I wrote him a personal letter. I made a mistake. When I sent it to my printer, I didn't look at the stationer I had queued up there. And all of the senior aides to the senator had the senator's stationery. Well, the letter printed out on Claiborne Pell, you know. And so I looked at that, and I thought, well, this has got to get through a bunch of spear holders to get to Cheney. And maybe if I leave it on there, which is a no, you don't do that. You don't write your personal stuff on the boss's stationery. It will get to Dick. Well, indeed, it did get to Dick. And 2 days later, I got a telephone call from, I think it was Channel 5, Providence, Rhode Island. And they said, Dr. Jones. I said, yes. They said, this is Bill Smith, Channel 5, Providence Island, Rhode Island. They said, what do you know about reverse speech? And I said, I know a little bit. What do you know about it? And he said, then he started reading my letter to me. Some of the spear holders, or Dick, decided that this was a great way to derail Claiborne Pell, who had a well-known reputation for being interested in the weird, and had hired a guy to work full-time for him. Now, this was the first race that Pell was in with someone who might have beat him. It was Claudine Schneider, who was a very popular only representative from Rhode Island. Now, I knew that it wasn't going to work out that way because I'd had David do some reverse speech of the only joint meeting that they had, Claudine and Pell. And so I knew how it was going to come out from some of the things that Claudine had. She did not have the will to go for his jugular on this subject. Okay. Anyhow, this upset things, and as you can imagine, on the staff, they were concerned, felt that I had was going to make them lose their job. I had a trip scheduled for China, and Pell said, we're going to let you meet with one reporter, and then you disappear. Just stay home until it's time to go to China, about a week. And so we did. But it made the press. This was from Harper's Magazine. It got in a couple of the weekly magazines. Now, the story is, when I got to China, and they had set up, I met all of the senior Qigong masters. It was a wonderful trip. And they gave me a couple of books, and they said, get this one translated. It's the latest research in Qigong. And but they gave me 3 books. And I remembered the cover of the one that they wanted me to get translated, the color of the cover. When I got back, I couldn't remember the title of the book. And so I called up the Library of Congress, the Far East office, and I said, look, I've got 3 books in Chinese. If I bring the dust covers over, will you translate them for me? They said, sure, I'll do that. And so I went over there, and at noontime, and as I went into the building, I looked at the breadboard where their office was, and I saw the Middle East office. I had to walk right by it to get to the Far East. And so I went in there, and there was only one guy there. He had to stay in the office, everyone else without the lunch, and he was eating his lunch at his desk. Obviously, Arabic family. And I introduced myself, and I said, I've got a word that but this was just intuitive on my part. I said, it may be Arabic, and I wonder if you could translate it. And he said, well, what is it? I said, well, I've never seen it written, but it sounds like Simone. He said, well, that's a French word. And he said, it probably is Simoon. And I said, and what is Simoon? He said, that's a hot desert storm. I don't think that Cheney or Baker or Bush speak any Arabic and had any idea that in reverse speech they were identifying the name of the next operation in that area. I got a lovely memo from Pell, and when I told him this, he said, Scott, are we ever going to understand this, how this works? And I said, yeah, but it's out there. And the way we're going to understand it is that we've got to change. And this is our responsibility. I said, we've got some growing up to do. Obviously, we've got some capability that we're not accessing. And Turtle Woman singing. This is my UFO link. Paula Underwood. I met Paula at George Washington University. Her daughter was the president of the psychology class, and she asked me to come over to talk, tell them what I was doing with Pell. And I did, and she said, oh, by the way, I've invited my mother to come for this. And we were standing in the hallway, and she was looking over my shoulder and said, oh, here comes my mother now. And so I turned around, and here came Paula walking, striding beautifully up, and head down, and she put her head up, and she looked at me and just stopped dead in her tracks and just stared at me. And I thought, well, I'll tell you frankly, what I did. She was looking at me so fiercely, I thought, I better check my fly. I wonder if I am not the way I should be, And so I checked that. It was all right. That was cool. And then she just turned on her heel and left. And her daughter said, Mom, Mom. And later on in the talk, she came in the back of the room, and she just drilled me all the time. I was working the crowd, and every time I'd come to her, boy, this was just hard to look at me. And then she left before, and I said, and so in closing, she got up and left. Well, that night at home, I told my wife about this peculiar woman that I had met, and the telephone rang. We lived in Northern Virginia, and I answered the phone, and she said, I'm Lori's mother. And I thought, okay. And she said, I owe you an apology. And I said, well, what for? She said, well, I was rude to you, and I'm sorry. She said, but I don't think you remember. And I thought, good grief. Was this an old teenage sweetheart I had and I'd forgotten? And I said, you're right, Paula, I don't remember. What should I have remembered? She said, well, can you come over? And I said, well, where are you? And she said, I'm about a mile and a half from you. And I said, well, I'm sure we can get together. She said, I think you should come over tonight. And I thought, boy. And I said, okay. And so I invited my wife to come along with me. And she's a wonderful woman. We've been married for 58 years now. And she looked at me and she said, Scott, that's your problem. and so I went over there and met Paula. And she's an extraordinary woman, very intuitive. I walked in. She didn't ask me. She said, I'll fix your tea. And I am a tea drinker. And I thought, well, there's a clue, And so we very quickly got to it. She said, you don't remember? And I said, Paula, no, I don't remember. And I said, what should I remember? And she said, where we have been meeting. And, at this, I was a little leery, so I kept looking around and I couldn't see any other problems, and I knew where the door was. And I knew I could probably get there before she could get to me. But she said, we have met several times on the mothership for the usual physical examinations. And I said, what do you mean mothership? And she said, well, mothership as in UFOs. And she said, you don't remember? And I said, Paula, believe me, if I had had that experience, I think I would remember. And she said, Scott, you have had that experience. And I said, well, then I would like to know why I don't remember. Paula was much more in my life. She was the keeper of the tradition, the oral tradition of her tribe. And she had 2 children. Neither one of them were willing to go through the discipline of learning that oral tradition. But I would sit at her foot and I would ask her, I said, well, Paula, is there anything in there about dolphins? And it looked like she was loading CDs or something, click, 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 until it got to that CD. And then she would start talking and singing that from the oral tradition, what she called the big fish. And she said, I assume these are dolphins. And I asked her, is there anything in there about UFOs? And she said, oh, I've checked that out. She said, yes. And then she sang me that part of it. And generations ago, the elders in the tribe, according to this, what she said, were getting messages that there were people somewhere who wanted to come visit. And so they had a council of the elders, and they decided that this would not be right for that group to hold that meeting. And so they communicated back, no thank you. And so they didn't. They honored that. They didn't show up. Well, a number of wonderful things happened with Paul. And let me just drop the other shoe. I have no walkaway memories. And where do you put information like this? What if I came up to you and I said, the last time we saw each other was aboard the mothership? It in fact may be true. I do not know. And I asked Paula just before she died. I said, Paula, this is really not fair. I mean, there are ethical issues here. If I've had these memories, if this is really part of my life experience, I deserve to know this. And I said, would you intercede with him? Because she was in real good contact with him. And she said, yeah. And she told me, I said, well, how does it work with you? And she said, well, they come in and I hear them telepathically. And she said, it's like the grandmothers when I'm contacting them, and the grandmothers are in spirit. And I said, well, how do you tell the difference? She said, it's real simple. The grandmothers come over this shoulder, and the visiting others, as she calls them, comes over this shoulder. And so I said, tell them that I want my memories back. And I want to know, and then I want to know why they didn't give them to me. Now this is a provocative response. It took a while. A couple of weeks later, she called me. She was living in California now. And she said, well, I have your answer. She said, first of all, they tell me that you will get your memories back, but not now, because you are doing now what they want you to do. And they're afraid that if they gave me your memories, if they gave me my memories, that you couldn't handle it well. Which was, an insult. Well, what the heck, So I went crazy for a month. That would ruin the world, and as long as I recovered. And now the interesting thing is, what I was doing at that time was I was doing nothing else but global peace work. I'm just reporting, folks. Okay. There's at least 6 explanations for experiences. I'm going to have to leave this, but this was a Naval Institute Proceedings, one of our Navy professional journals. The editor came to me one time and asked, Scott, I had written some things, and he had read them apparently, and he said, would you write an article for the journal? And I said, well, I'd be honored to do that. What do you want me to write about? And I said, well, write about anything you want. Well, now, I was out of the service, and I had been debriefed from all the programs that I was in. But I followed a number of these programs from the outside. As anyone who's been into programs, there's an extraordinary amount of material that is in the open source, open press about it. And if you had been in that program, you can recognize it. And so I thought, when I was briefed into the satellite, photosatellite programs, I thought that this is so good and so powerful, but boy, this really belongs to the world. We've got to get this into the civilian sector, because the environmental, the agricultural use, one thing and another. Well, the government, of course, knew that, and they had Landsat, but the resolution wasn't nearly as good. Deliberately, they kept it much lower than what was going on, what was available. And so I wrote an article, an unclassified article on that. Of course, every article had to be cleared through the Pentagon. The Air Force counterintelligence objected to that article. It took a year to get it approved, and they made me cut out half of it. It was going to be in two different editions. It turned out that the technical part, which I got and documented carefully from previously published open source documents, I didn't have to draw on anything that I remembered, and from a number of congressional reports. It was all in there. What they objected to was what I thought was the fun part of it, the non-technical part of the arguments between CIA and the Air Force and the DoD, Department of Defense, about the use of this capability and who would have priority or what targets would be covered. Now, I had done a little bit of this, and this was a cantankerous situation. We didn't have a lot of these to begin with, and everybody wanted them to get on their targets, quite naturally. I mean, that was where they had responsibilities. So they finally said, you have to cut out all this political stuff, and then they approved it. Now, the reason I bring this up is that I think I'll go back to the proceedings now and tell them that I'm in global peace work, and one part of that is what I'm going to get into next, called disclosure. I think it's time to try to engage the world intellectually and spiritually and emotionally on a future that very likely will involve information that establishes that we have been in contact with other civilizations. And of course, the challenge to other people who write well and have access to other professional journals is to think about that also. I was looking at one of my friends, and he's not weird at all. I'm going to try it this September, I think. I am a member of the Peace and Justice Studies Association. These are schools that have peace and studies and conflict resolution programs. These are the schools that I deal with around the world and for my peace work. And I have their annual meeting in September. They called for papers, and so I have submitted 2 papers to them. One of them is titled The Elephant in the Room, and the elephant in the room is a discussion about what is ahead of us, what is the phenomena, and should we be thinking about it now? As I'm sure any of you know or realize, this doesn't exist in academia. I mean, no, that's not true. There is some coursework being offered, but it is well attended. The students vote for it with their feet. They sign up for that class because they're interested in it. But and the reason there's nothing going on in academia is really quite simple. It's not because they don't think it's a non-issue, and I don't think it's because they have thought about it and they're afraid of it. It doesn't exist in academia because there's no money for it. No government money is out there to say, okay, here's a proposal. If you are interested in doing research on this and talk about the impact of disclosure, we've got a couple mil, and so get in there and compete for it. Now, if the government ever does that, and let's don't hold our breath that they will do that, then academia will get involved, and some new, fresh minds will get on this. Leave a record. This is a first book I published on talks that I gave years ago. This was what I call the first X conference back in 1995. I think I still have about 8 of those out there if you want them. I'm selling them for $10. It's a bargain just for the weight of it. But I include copies of letters that I got from the White House and Carl Sagan in there. I invited them, as Steve has been doing, and some from diplomats. It's an interesting book. Okay. Now, what I mean by that last thing, that truth is a chameleon, is that I know what's ahead of me when I start this Plan C, which I'm now going to talk about, is that we're going to go across cultures around the world, different countries and different cultures. And a big issue is, how do you talk to another culture? How do you communicate effectively? First of all, to try to educate them as what we want to talk about. And then I want to poll internationally using the web to find out I want to give a voice to the people of the world on disclosure. That's the name of the game. And then I want to take that information back, put it together, and share it with all heads of states of the country. Because I want to influence. I think the disclosure is going to take place. It may happen by accident, where they can't come in and clean something up, and then we're going to have a period of real chaos. And I think we can do better than that by careful planning. And Plan C, which I will now talk about, is that. But getting the message out and then getting a response back that is sort of common, so that we can say the world, as if the world speaks with one voice, which it never has, thinks this, it's going to be tricky. But that's what I mean by truth. Okay, well, I'm not going to go into this. This is interesting, some folks. There's Stanley Krippner in the middle of that, and there's we were in Moscow. Okay, I must say this. This hero of the Soviet Union, this guy that I'm looking at, I was in Moscow in 1990 on the subject of the job I had with Claiborne Pell for 6 years, and I thank you taxpayers for this, because this was wonderful. He sent me around the world to find out what research in consciousness, what was going on. And when one of his friends, Lawrence Rockefeller, heard about this, he said, look, Jones, as long as you're doing that, why don't you ask him about UFOs? And I was surprised to hear that Lawrence had an interest in that, because I don't think he knew that I had an interest. And so I did. And what I found out very quickly, both in China and in the Soviet Union then, some of the labs that I visited had responsibilities for psychic phenomena and UFO. And what they told me in the Soviet Union was that, look, what we're learning and what people tell us who've allegedly had contact is that psychic phenomena appears all the time with UFOs, telepathy and one thing and another. Of course, that's in the literature that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Okay, so for 8 hours one day, the guy to the right, he is the director of the lab, had his people come in and brief me on the research that they had done on UFOs and extraterrestrials. And they had documentation. I mean, they would give me, there was a stack of books this high before the first day was over. And I don't read Russian, but when you have some print in red, you probably can deduce that says, classified or secret or something like that. And but they were briefing, and I could ask questions, and most of these were engineers and physicists. Most of this was technical stuff, although they did get into some of the soft sciences. And the next morning, I had another full day scheduled. The next morning when I went in there, and I'm sorry, I cannot come up with this guy's name, but he said, Dr. So-and-so is going to be here. He wants to meet you and tell you something. And I said, well, that'd be fine. Well, when this guy came in, he came in like a battleship at 31 knots. I mean, his energy was palpable. And apparently the other people in the lab knew him and knew of him. They just literally melted away. They just got out of his way. And he came right up to me and almost started a finger-waving tirade against me in Russian, and it was being translated. Now, the issue was this. The Krasnoyarsk phase-away radar, during negotiations with the Soviet Union, it violated what the Soviets agreed to as far as being associated with the missile defense for the capital. Certain radars were allowed within so many miles, I think 200 kilometers, 200 miles, nautical miles, but anything outside of that was disallowed. Well, the Russians were in the process of building this, and this was way away from that, from Moscow. And so the Soviet negotiators from the foreign ministry agreed to get rid of it. And the hero of the Soviet Union, who was the father of this phase-away radar, was really mad about this. And he wanted to know what I knew about this. And he said, you work for the senator, you go back and you tell the senator this. And, I was really given instructions. Well, it didn't dawn on me until I got back home what the whole point of this was. He knew why I was there. I was being briefed on UFOs. It didn't click on me. I am now convinced that that particular phase array radar was important in their monitoring the comings and goings of vehicles. And that he knew it, and probably the guys who gave it away had no briefing on it. And he was unhappy about it. Oh, there's my expediter. That was the guy that we hired to get us on airplanes when we wanted to fly one thing or another. Look to the right of his right hand. That's a stack of $100 bills that we took over there. When you're working for Lawrence Rockefeller, that's no problem. And it's a problem for me now, since Lawrence is in spirit. Okay, went up to Leningrad, and Sergei, after we talked to him for a while, what he told us that he was on one of the recovery teams, that when there was a crash, he would go out. I said, that's great. I said, I want a hunk of something from the crash. He said, he just shook his head, but he left the meeting, and he came back about an hour and a half later, and he said, I'll give you something. And I said, I'm glad you will, because I'll trade you something. I had just come back from China before that, and the Chinese had given me some stuff that they said came from a crash, that may have come from a crash. And so I had some of that. And so my big dream was I'd get this trade going on, and maybe sometime somebody in the United States would say, hey, we want to play the game too, so we'll give you something to trade with. I brought it back and had it checked out, dominantly an aluminum compound, and the isotopic ratios were well within range of what we experienced. And one of the people that did the test for me said, you're probably trying to find unknownium. And I said, yeah, I guess so. And he said, well, none of our machines recognize unknownium. We're fairly familiar with the periodic chart, but what ain't on there is we're not going to find, you know. Well, there we are. I want to say, you know, I'm really interested in this last one, the art, the music, the poetry, the children's games. I'll leave that top one alone. I'll come back to that later. But, you know, I'd like to hear their poetry. I'd like to see their art and listen to their music. Because, you know, look where they are. If they can get to us, they've had a lot of time. I mean, all of their needs are met by probably by nanotechnology or something we don't even know about. So they don't have to grow food. If they want something, they just create it. And so that gives them time to do what? Well, I imagine over the years they have developed this thing and what's inside of that. And so I would imagine their music and their poetry and their art is fairly sophisticated. And I sure would like to be challenged by that. Okay. Now, the easy way. You thought I'd never tell you. There it is, folks. And I honestly don't know whether I'm chickadee or hummingbird. I really wish that I had, because I love the nuthatch, the way it climbs down trees. I thought that's a neat bird. Okay, Plan C is a plan to prepare the world for disclosure. And I have a feeling that if we don't do something like this, whether it's Plan C or not, we're asking for trouble. Because it's going to be a shock to most of us, it's certainly going to be a shock to me to find out that what I thought was the way it was working has nothing to do with it, or to find out that, gee, boy, we were either good or lucky, because a lot of the stuff was that way. I said I was involved in global peace work. I travel around and present this to colleges and universities around the world. And I stayed out of the UFO area because it can be a third rail, you know, the ridicule factor. And I didn't want to, what I was proposing to them in my program, the Sustainable Peace and Development Program, is challenging enough. But I have asked from time to time, you know, I would bring the subject up and watch body language, the UFO subject. And so I decided to leave it alone until a couple of years ago. And I thought, you know, really, what I should be thinking about is not global peace, but cosmic peace work. And so I've sort of gone, I have given myself a new job. I'm now involved in cosmic peace work. Now, the purpose of this is to prepare the global public for disclosure and to influence the strategies of disclosure by the terrestrial controllers. And I'm sure that every country who is technically involved and capable of learning about this and have recovered perhaps some crash, they are ready in case they have to make a statement about this and cannot avoid it. And then the third thing is to send a message to the visiting others, and that's what I call the aliens, that we are concerned, vigilant, and determined to do the proper things in order to enter into, 20 minutes, enter into a larger cosmic community. So this is the three purposes of this. And of course, disclosure, those are some of the classical means or definitions of what I want to do. And this is really what I think we will disclose. We've never been alone, that we are intimately related to everything in the universe. And it's time now to discover these biggies at the bottom. Yeah, who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? And of course, there is a building, there is now a discipline, exopolitics, that is building a body of open source knowledge on this. And that's what I think exopolitics is, covering the relationships between the folks here on Earth Mother and extraterrestrials and other, I don't know where else they're from. I just don't know. We ought to think about this. A lot of them probably are more spiritual than they are corporal. Plan A was the initiative. Lawrence Rockefeller asked me to develop a strategy to get to the Clinton administration. And the purpose of that was really quite limited, to get them to review the policy that they inherited from previous administrations on this subject, to see if it was appropriate to change the disinformation and silence and secrecy on the subject. Plan B was spontaneously revealed in the first meeting with Jack Gibbons. Jack Gibbons was President Clinton's science advisor. I knew Jack, worked with him for 6 years on the Hill. He was the head of the think tank on the Hill. Pell was on their board, and I did all the staff work for them, so I knew Jack very well. And so we sent letters to Jack, and we set up the meeting. The meeting was scheduled for the afternoon of one of the days of the week, and Lawrence Rockefeller flew down from New York and was joined by one of his lawyer friends here in town. And the three of us went over there. We're planning on going over. And the day before, I got a call from his secretary and said that, you know, Scott, I'm sorry to tell you, but the meeting has to be canceled because Vice President Gore has called a meeting that conflicts with the 1:30 meeting that we have scheduled with Mr. Rockefeller. And I said, well, that's not good news. I said, can we reschedule? And she was flipping through, and she said, well, I suppose that Mr. Rockefeller wouldn't mind meeting at 7:30 in the morning. Like, you know, that's a no-brainer. He doesn't get up at that hour. And I said, I'm sure Mr. Rockefeller would have no problem with that. She said, really? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, fine, we'll reschedule it for 7:30. And so we did. Now, this is rather important because, you know, Jack Gibbons had plenty of time to get a briefing on this. And he had resources at the White House to ask people for a briefing that will bring me up to speed because Mr. Rockefeller wants to talk about UFOs. And so I assumed that Jack would be ready. He's a brilliant physicist. And when we walked in, I saw a different Gibbons than I had ever seen before. He was doing everything but wringing his hands. He was ill at ease. And the first thing he said was, Mr. Rockefeller, I don't know anything about this subject. You know, which was a stunner. I mean, what was the message there? Was he really saying, the White House is not going to talk about this? Was that the message? And I couldn't believe this. And I looked at Rockefeller. I'd known Rockefeller for quite a while, and I'd spent lots of private time with him. I'd never seen him angry. And I looked at him, and he was clearly not happy. And he said, well, Dr. Gibbons, he said, I've been thinking for some time about taking a full-page ad out of every major newspaper in the United States and encouraging the public to write their senators, their congressmen, and the White House on this subject, because I think it's overdue that the government tell us what is really going on. Now, I think that was spontaneous. I don't know that he had been doing that, but I call that Plan B, okay? And that's where Plan C comes in. And Jack's response was that, you know, Mr. Rockefeller, you don't have to do that. We'll work with you. You know, what can we do, you know? So that was, now what we found out later, and Bruce didn't mention it, was that the briefing that he had asked for was given to him, was delivered to him after we left the White House. He had talked to the CIA liaison officer in the White House and said, look, Mr. Rockefeller's come down, I need a briefing on this. And the CIA didn't want to take that job, but they couldn't avoid it. And so they called the Weird Desk and Ron Pandolfi and said, you know, the CIA liaison did this and said, you know, put together a briefing for Dr. Gibbons. He's meeting with Mr. Rockefeller. And Bruce Maccabee was involved, and that's his thing, his story. So, but he put together a briefing in a very short time because he wasn't given much notice, and he was not given any guidance, as I recall Bruce telling me. And so he just came up with 10 or 12 of the more notable sightings and sent it to them, and worked, I think, as Bruce had said, overnight to do that. Well, that arrived after the meeting was held. Well, that afternoon I was back in my office, and telephone rang. It was Pandolfi from CIA, and he said, "Well, Scott, how did the meeting go? How did the meeting go this afternoon?" And I said, "We didn't have one this afternoon." He said, "Oh, it was canceled." I said, "No, we had it this morning." Long pause. "What time?" I said, "Well, it started at 7:30. He said, "Oh my God." And I said, "Ron, I hope they just skin you alive." And I said, "You really didn't do the president any favors by that." And so that was the beginning of it. Now, we met several times, and they asked, well, what do you want us to do? And so we had discussions about this, and it was my suggestion that we take a look again at the documentation for Roswell. And apparently that was a poor recommendation, because I think the Air Force was fairly well ready to beat that horse again. And what they came up with was a real loser. Another shot in the foot by the Air Force. But I thought about this a lot. What else could we have asked for from the President's Science Advisor to do? We had written a letter and gone through a number of drafts for the President, asking him to directly do it. Lawrence, very savvy guy, when he asked me, "I want you to come up with a strategy to get to the President," I said, "I've got it." I was in his office, and he looked at me and he said, "What is it?" I said, "Call your secretary and ask her to call the White House and tell the President that Mr. Rockefeller wants to speak to him." And he said, "Yeah, that would work." He said, "But I don't want to do it that way." He said, "I want him to know that we have done some work, and there are people on his staff who are willing to support him in this area." And so that's why we went through the Science Advisor. And indeed, the President and Mr. Rockefeller met after this and had a private conversation of at least one, of which I am not privy to. I don't know what they discussed. I would like to know, but I do not know. So Plan C is based on inspired by Plan B, which was, get the word out, and by the failure of Plan A. And I call Plan A a failure because obviously President Clinton did not make any announcement, and that probably prudently so, because it was his determination, or the determination of his political people, that would not be prudent. There was no reason to make an announcement. There was no one out there except Lawrence Rockefeller asking for an announcement. And that, as powerful as that is, was not enough. Now, billions of folks have no knowledge of exopolitics, but all of us have a stake in it. Now, when I say billions, and the reason they don't is it's very simple. Just think of this, How many people in the world have enough energy or enough time to think about anything about the next meal? I mean, that is really the condition of the world. We are really an elitist, exclusive group here. And there are not too many of us. There's a beautiful number here, but we are really in a minority group who are more than I call the six packs group. When they do these national surveys, do you believe in UFOs? I don't mean to demean. I've got lots of friends who love the six pack. They pop it off and they pop one down and say, yeah, I believe in UFOs. They at least give it that much thought. But that is a long distance away from, and they don't ask the question usually, what is the significance of UFOs? What would it mean to you in your life? Usually these pollings are not terribly sophisticated. So I'm cautious about the results we get. But I think, in fact, that we have been known and monitored and approached, contacted, and investigated from the beginning of time. And I think the evidence is out there, and a lot of it is really ancient. It goes back to the Middle East, Sumerian clay tablets, and so on. And so the knowledge is there. It's not recognized. And and it's a legitimate question. Why isn't it recognized? Is this, it appears that if what Turtle Woman singing tells me is truth, that they have decided to zap me and put me in amnesia, have the visiting others decided that for this little community, this beautiful blue orb down here, they are so mean-spirited and violent that the last thing we want them to do is to make an announcement, because that would just give them something else to fight about. So it may be that the quarantine is not coming out of the controllers in Moscow and Beijing and Washington, D.C., but this is really not our option. The challenge is to responsibly engage, for Plan C, the world population, and to give them a voice in exopolitics. We're going to have to. Now, deliberately in Plan C, there is no role for governments or the United Nations. They are not disinvited, they are just simply not invited. I don't want to shake them up. But I'm not mad at them. I think it's a losing approach to say, look, we Plan C, and this is the role for government. We want you to do this. They're not going to get involved. A number of us have tried that before, and a few of us have scar tissue on it. So let's try something different. It's going to involve, and I'm really not mad at the governments. The governments will play a role. We probably won't recognize it because you don't do something like this without. This is going to be open source. It's going to be. If I can raise the support to do it, it will be, people will be talking about it. I mean, that's the whole purpose of Plan C, to get people to talk about it, so governments will know about it. Now, the first thing to do is to establish an intellectual base for this, and I want to recruit global think tanks, colleges, and universities that addresses a number of assumptions. And I will let you read those, and we're going to go through because I'm down to the tail end of this. In sum, it's going to be a big impact, folks. And I think the only thing greater than the challenge will be the opportunities for Earth and all the creatures when we pull this off. Got to get the best minds involved. I'm sure there are a lot of brilliant people involved, have been over the years in different countries on this that we know a little bit about, but the best minds have not been involved, and they are everywhere, a lot of them in academia, not all of them. That's why academia has not been involved. And those few who have talked about it, and I've talked to a few, said without any funding, the subject really doesn't exist. It's not in their curriculum. Now that's the world to academia is what they teach. And they don't teach this, so this is not part of the world. And those who think about it are certainly sensitive to this. Shades of John Mack and what he went through, if they've ever heard of John Mack. But they know the system. They know their system and their institution. And you don't give any competition a leg up for the next good assignment by doing something as dumb as get involved in this. Now, the exopolitical community is growing, and I'm really going to depend upon them. And what I'm asking from them, well, okay, there'll be 3 phases of this, and I've really got to go through this much more rapidly. The future impact is what we're going to ask is that the future impact doesn't require any knowledge except what we've given about the potential of a future in which we do know that we have interaction with civilizations off planet. And so we're going to ask them, what will the impact be in your country and in your culture for this when that future changes? And so, you can just theorize about it or think about it. We want think tanks and we want people in academia to think about it. Then the next question is, okay, having thought sort of theoretically about it, what do you think what will really happen when it actually happens? This is a different state now. What will happen in your community, in your country, in your culture? And then the last one is the post-disclosure, a year later, what has happened to your country and your culture? The assumption, and if it doesn't happen like this, it doesn't make sense what we're talking about. This is if it's an Independence Day scenario, this doesn't make sense at all. Those are some of the questions. I'm going to post this complete outline on my website so that if any of you think that you're going to miss something, you're probably not anyhow, but you'll be able to bring it up and take a look at it at your leisure. It's not there yet. You're going to collect the information that the think tanks and the colleges and universities come up with, and then we're going to poll the world and ask them questions. And this is where the cultural issues come in. Ask them, what do you expect from disclosure? And from that, we will come up with a people's manifesto of expectations from disclosure. And the reason for doing that is to try to positively influence any scenarios that governments have for disclosure. And I'm sure that they have them. And they would naturally put their spin on it. Well, we want to put our spin on first. And this is back and forth, different phases, what we're going to do. A final report. Phase 6, I had to give the visiting others. I don't know what they will do. I'm sure that they will watching, but they will come in. Now I figure that it will take 2 years, and people I've talked to said, you can't do this in 2 years. It's going to take longer than that. Probably will. The way I want to organize this is make it virtual. I don't want to build buildings or hire space. Simply work on the web. Then we don't have to move bodies around. I'm going to ask people to do it for free from the goodness of their heart. A few will take that option. Most won't. I estimate it'll take about $5 million to do this. Let me get to another. These are some countries that I've come up with, but this is completely open at this point. I just happened to put the G7 in there because I think they control a lot of the bucks and would have the first interest in this. I don't know about funding schools. I don't want to have to meet and talk to the bureaucracy of 100 universities on this subject and try to convince them to get involved. I'll just simply ask them to do it as a service to society. Okay. I want to get to what I call the spleen section. Now, what I expect from this community here is that they come up with an unemotional, erudite think piece that sets the scene. We're going to have to educate some folks. This can't be too long, and I think that we're going to have to be very super smart about this one. I think this is what the government will do when they have to make disclosure. I think it'll be very sophisticated. It will not be presented in terms of a threat. And I think it will be an honest statement of challenges ahead, because once the cat is out of the bag, they've got other issues to attend to. Why disclosure now? Well, a lot of things have changed. These are some obvious ones. The web, TV, media has broken out of the truth boycott. And I think, when I was in China, I had quite a discussion with a Chinese member of their Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this subject. And I had told him what I had learned. Well, he asked, what have you learned in my country? And I told him. And he said, oh, that's very good. And I said, why doesn't China make the announcement? And we discussed about that a little bit. And I decided I would provoke him, just a tad. And so this was through an interpreter. And it was my interpreter, intelligence agent that they assigned to me every time I went there. And I said, well, you asked Dr. Sun, why does China kowtow to the United States on this subject when it doesn't do so on any other subject? Well, that's a pejorative term. And he spoke enough English that I'm sure he was hearing me, but he certainly heard kowtow. And he flushed a little bit, and very short response. And my interpreter, I think, softened even that short response. It might have been, tell that idiot to leave. I don't know what he really told him. But he said, tell Dr. Jones we've already discussed this subject. I don't know why any country would defer to us. I suspect that something has gone on that we don't know about. Okay. Yeah, John Alexander will remember this when first time we met Bud Hopkins. He came down to Washington, D.C. We went over and he played at the last bit of his, he played a tape of a person that he was working with, contactee, and he said, this is a tape recording. He's in hypnosis, and I'm working with him, and he turned this on, and this heavy breathing, and oh, there's another one over there, and there's one over there by the garage. Oh no, not my penis. And then he turned it off. And I looked at John, and John looked at me, and he had told us that was, that this is at the end of my talk, I wanted to play this, I thought, what the hell does that mean? What are we to learn from that, out of context, one thing another? Well, then a few people started applauding. And then the rush went up to meet the speaker, and John and I sat there, and then after it cleared, I went up to him and I introduced myself. I said, I think that was a bit abusive of your crowd here to play it that way. And Bud said, well, I just hope they treat us as well as we treat each other. And I said, Bud, I said, if that's the way it turns out, we are doomed. Okay, now this is the end because I'm over time, but I want to get this out. And what I call this, the way I operate, I am as human a person as you've ever met. I operate from the spleen and from the heart and from the head. And when I get upset about something, the first thing that comes out is I vent my spleen. And so when I was writing this, these are the things that would, hypothetically would come from the government disclosure. This is the President of the United States greeting fellow Americans, and I have something very important to tell you. Well, the first list are the things that I think he ought to say, and the first ones obviously come from my spleen, I'm really, irritated. I don't like to be lied to by anybody, but I particularly don't like to be lied to by my government. And I considering withholding this highly undemocratic at this point, And so if you'll read these, I'll click through the others. They get nicer later on as I get to my heart and then to my mind. I do want somebody to apologize to the country and the world and tell us that it will never happen again, another lie. and tell us what can we expect to gain from disclosure and contact. And to assure the country that they are safeguarding, that even they don't know how this is going to come out. but we're vigilant. And then from the visiting others, this will be a scary time, no matter how it happens. Even at best, it's a time for calm and truth and some time. Two entirely different situations, dissemination and contact. And they have to be separated by whatever time it takes. It's sort of like grieving. How long does it take to grieve over the loss of it takes as long as it takes. And, after the dissemination, the period of contact, this would be my recommendation to the visiting others, is that we hear something about you and from you, but, the time for contact will be when people are starting to say, well, where are the visiting others? We've decided that, they're wherever they are, white hats or black hats, they're out there. Well, where are they? Now that's the time for contact, for physical. And now here's what I would like to hear from the visiting others. The president makes the announcement, then he says, I have a message from the visiting others. Who are they? Where are they from? And how long they've been associated with Earth? And why disclosure now? I want them to say, from their view, why is it now? Why is it timely? And what do they expect to get from disclosure and contact? And what do they have to share with Earth? And when is the 10th planet going to arrive? And what will be the consequences? And the last one, of course, is a personal thing. It would be a provocative question from them. Do you realize that our coming brings the family together? And what does that mean? And of course, it brings up the issue of what will the impact be on organized religions. I'm not so sanguine, John. I think that the Vatican, is well prepared, and some others. But it's certainly going to spawn the creation of new religions. Can't you imagine that folks are saying, hey, stick with me. I'm plugged in. I'm getting the word directly from these folks, and I'm your new leader. And, so just fill up the basket, folks. That's going to happen. And, we laugh about it, but that could be a very serious thing, because people are really going to be confused when this happens. Now, people are going to be unhappy. I think I'm unhappy now, but we've got to let this happen in a way that our anger and our fear doesn't get in the way to what the calm leadership, that we don't exacerbate the problem by making it more difficult for leadership to do what they have to do at this time. And so very quickly, I think we have to realize that we're going to have to expect the president to say that, he's granting immunity for people who are involved in this program to give testimony to Congress, and that they can say anything, they can answer any question truthfully, and they'll be under oath, and they're not going to pay for it. And I think that compensation for citizens who are injured, and this is one. There has been a number of people who have been contacted, shades of John Mack and other woodworkers, who have been psychologically and physically harmed. And these people need to be, and I would hope that the visiting others can make a very quick and positive contribution to getting those minds back to a period of love and joy and understanding of what they had gone through and why. That's it, folks.